They say love makes a man soft. They are wrong. Love didn't make the Ice King weak. It just gave him a reason to burn the world down. Peace. It was a sensation Kang Jae-Hwan had only known for 12 months. After 10 years of winter, his life had finally thawed into a permanent spring. He had Sade, his queen, and he had Hana, the tiny sleeping miracle, breathing softly in the crib before him. He was no longer the Ice King. He was a father, a husband, a man who felt the warmth of the floor beneath his feet and the love in his chest. But in the world of monsters, peace is not a gift. It is a distraction. His heart, which Sade had worked so hard to restart, skipped a beat, then another. Then it stopped. The black orchid, the calling card of the viper, the man who had poisoned him a decade ago, the man who was supposed to be dead. Someone had been in the penthouse. Someone had stood over his sleeping daughter while he slept in the next room. The spring was over. The winter was back. Kenji, wake the men. Lock the doors. If anyone tries to leave this building, kill them. The monster wasn't gone. He was just waiting, and tonight he woke up hungry. The metallic hiss of blast shutters sealing the floor-to-ceiling windows cut through the silence like a guillotine. Sade jolted awake, her hand instinctively reaching for the other side of the bed. It was cold, empty. "Jae-Hwan?" Her voice was a groggy whisper, swallowed by the sudden, oppressive darkness of the room. She scrambled out of bed, grabbing her silk robe. The nursery monitor on the nightstand was dark, disabled. Panic, sharp and immediate, spiked in her chest. She ran barefoot into the hallway, nearly colliding with a mole of muscle. Kenji Sato stood guard outside the nursery door, his hand resting on his holster. He didn't look at her. "Go back to your room, Mrs. Kang." "Where is my husband? Where is Hana?" "The child is safe. The boss is securing the perimeter." Sade pushed past him before he could stop her. She found Jae-Hwan in the living room, but the man standing there wasn't the husband who had kissed her goodnight hours ago. This was the Ice King. He stood amidst a flurry of activity, man in tactical gear, moving furniture, checking vents, sweeping for bugs, yet he was perfectly, terrifyingly still. He was buttoning his cuffs, his face a mask of granite. The warmth that had lived in his eyes for the past year was gone, replaced by the old familiar void. "Jae-Hwan," she breathed, stepping toward him. "Why are the shutters down? Kenji said—" "You are not to leave the penthouse," he interrupted. He didn't turn to face her. His voice was devoid of inflection, a flat line. "Cancel your appointments. The university classes are suspended indefinitely. No one comes in, no one goes out." "Is it a threat? Is someone coming for us?" Sade reached out, placing her hand on his arm. He flinched. It wasn't a subtle movement. He jerked his arm away from her touch, as if she were a flame and he was made of gasoline. He finally turned to look at her, and the distance in his eyes shattered her heart. It was the same look he had given her the day they met, like she was a liability to be managed. "Jae-Hwan, you're scaring me. Talk to me." "There is nothing to discuss," he said, stepping back to put more space between them. "This is a necessary precaution. You will stay in the master suite with Hana until I say otherwise." "I am your wife, not your prisoner," she cried, the fear turning to anger. "If we are in danger, I have a right to know why." "You have a right to be safe," he countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous low rumble. "Knowledge is not safety, Sade. Ignorance is." He walked past her toward the elevator, signaling Kenji to follow. He was shutting her out, sealing himself back inside the armor she had spent so long stripping away. "Jae-Hwan, please," she begged, her voice cracking. He paused at the elevator doors, but didn't look back. "Don't wait up." The doors slid shut, severing the connection, leaving Sade alone in the dark, fortified tomb of their home.
The silence in the penthouse was heavy enough to choke on. For 3 hours, Sade had paced the length of the living room, watching the armed men patrolling the perimeter of her home like wolves. Every time she tried to enter the hallway leading to the tactical room, she was politely but firmly turned away. Finally, the door opened, and Kenji Sato emerged. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes etched deep, his suit jacket discarded to reveal the shoulder holster beneath. He headed for the kitchen, likely for coffee, but Sade intercepted him before he could cross the threshold. "Tell me," she demanded, blocking his path. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of being kept in the dark. Kenji stopped, looking down at her. A year ago, he would have sneered at her defiance. Now, he just looked weary. "The boss gave orders, Mrs. Kang. You are to remain—" "I don't care about his orders," Sade snapped, stepping closer. "I care that my husband looked at me like a stranger this morning. I care that my daughter's nursery is a crime scene. If we are going to die in this fortress, Kenji, I deserve to know who is killing us." Kenji held her gaze for a long moment. He glanced at the security camera in the corner, then back to her. He seemed to weigh the cost of disobedience against the desperation in her eyes. "Park Do-hyun," Kenji said quietly. In the underworld, they call him the Viper. The name meant nothing to Sade, but the way Kenji said it, with a reverence reserved for nightmares, made her blood run cold. 10 years ago, Kenji continued, leaning against the marble island, Jae-Hwan was his partner. They built this empire together, but the Viper grew greedy. He didn't just want to share, he wanted the crown. Sade felt a sick feeling coil in her stomach. "The poison." "Neurotoxin," Kenji corrected grimly. "Slipped into a glass of celebratory scotch. It was meant to kill Jae-Hwan instantly. Instead, it burned out his nervous system, leaving him in that hell of numbness you saved him from. We hunted the Viper for years, but he vanished. We thought he was dead." Kenji crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "He isn't dead. He was waiting for Jae-Hwan to have something to lose." "The orchid," Sade whispered, remembering the flower Jae-Hwan had crushed. "We found it in Hana's crib," Kenji revealed, the words dropping like stones. He bypassed 3 layers of military-grade security just to leave a flower next to your sleeping child. He didn't kill her because he wanted Jae-Hwan to know he could. Sade covered her mouth. A sob trapped itself in her throat. The coldness, the distance, the flinching, it all made terrifying sense. Jae-Hwan wasn't rejecting her. He was terrified that his mere existence drew death to their door. He returned to finish what he started, and this time he doesn't just want to break Jae-Hwan's body, he wants to break his heart. That is why you are locked in, Mrs. Kang. The Viper is hunting, and you are the prey.
The blast shutters turned the penthouse into a timeless void. Day and night were indistinguishable, measured only by the rhythmic feeding of Hana and the changing shifts of the armed guards outside the door. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against Sade's eardrums until she wanted to scream just to prove she still had a voice. Jae-Hwan had become a phantom. He left before Sade woke and returned long after she had feigned sleep. The man who had once canceled meetings just to watch a movie with her was gone. In his place was the Ice King, a warlord fighting a war she wasn't allowed to see. On the 4th night, the private elevator chimed at 3 a.m. Sade sat up in bed, her heart hammering. The door opened, and Jae-Hwan stepped into the dim light of the hallway. He stopped when he saw her sitting there, but he didn't speak. He was a ruin. His jacket was gone, his tie hanging loose around his neck. But it was his shirt that made Sade's breath catch in her throat. The pristine white silk was stiff with dark, crusted stains. The metallic tang of copper filled the air, overpowering the scent of sandalwood. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse. "Jae-Hwan," she whispered, sliding out of bed. "You're hurt." "It's not mine," he said.
his voice a gravelly rasp. He didn't move toward her. He moved toward the bathroom, stripping the shirt off as he went. Go back to sleep. He didn't wait for a response. The bathroom door didn't close. He didn't even grant her that privacy. She watched from the doorway as he stood under the scalding spray, the water swirling pink at his feet. He scrubbed his skin with a brutality that looked painful, as if he were trying to wash away not just the blood, but the man he had to become outside these walls. When he finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, his skin was red and raw, but his eyes were empty. He walked past her as if she were furniture, the warmth she had fought so hard to ignite in him seemingly extinguished. He climbed into the bed, lying on the agonizingly far edge of the mattress. He didn't reach for her. He didn't pull her close to chase away the nightmares. He lay stiff and silent, a soldier in a trench. Sade stared at his broad back, tears prickling her eyes. The contract was gone, the debt was paid, but as she lay in the darkness, listening to the even breathing of a man who refused to touch her, Sade realized with a sinking heart that she had never been more of a prisoner.
The tension inside the penthouse finally snapped on a Tuesday afternoon. It didn't begin with an explosion, but with a shout, raw, terrifying, and echoing from the service hallway. Sade didn't hesitate. She ran toward the sound, her bare feet slapping against the cold marble, the instinct to protect warring with the fear of what she might find. She skidded to a halt at the end of the corridor. The scene before her froze the blood in her veins. Jae-Hwan had Min-ho, the 19-year-old courier who had delivered the household linens for 3 years, pinned against the wall. His forearm pressed against the boy's windpipe, cutting off his air. Min-ho's face was turning a sickly shade of purple, his feet scrabbling uselessly against the floor, his eyes bulging in terror. "Who gave it to you?" Jae-Hwan roared, his voice shaking the walls. "The orchid. Who put it in the linens?" "I don't know," Min-ho choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Please, sir, I swear." Kenji stood nearby, looking unusually pale, holding a tablet that displayed a security log. "Boss, the tracking shows the crate was tampered with at the depot before it entered the van. Min-ho didn't load it, he just carried it." "He carried it into my house." Jae-Hwan didn't loosen his grip. The veins in his neck bulged, his eyes wild with a paranoia that saw enemies in every shadow. "He walked it right into my daughter's room. He is either a traitor or incompetent. Both are death sentences." He reached for the gun tucked into his waistband. The movement was fluid, practiced, and lethal. "Jae-Hwan, stop!" Sade threw herself between them, grabbing Jae-Hwan's arm with both hands. The muscle under his shirt was hard rock, vibrating with tension. He looked down at her, and for a split second, she didn't see her husband. She saw the monster the world feared. His eyes were glazed, seeing only a threat to be neutralized. "He's a child, Jae-Hwan," Sade cried, refusing to let go of his arm even as he tried to shake her off. "Look at him. He's terrified. He didn't do this." "The orchid was in the crib, Sade," Jae-Hwan snarled, the grief and fear crashing through his anger. "He got close enough to kill her. If I don't make an example—" "If you kill an innocent boy, does that make her safer?" Sade shouted back, forcing him to look at her, really look at her. "Does that make you the protector, or does it make you the viper?" The name struck him like a physical blow. His grip on Min-ho faltered. The boy slid to the floor, gasping for air, clutching his bruised throat. Min-ho stared at his own hands, then at Sade's fierce, tear-streaked face. The red haze in his vision slowly receded, replaced by a dawning horror at what he had almost done. He had become so consumed by the darkness outside that he had brought it inside the very sanctuary he was trying to protect. He stepped back, holstering his weapon with a trembling hand. He looked at Sade, not with anger, but with a profound, shattering shame. Without a word, he turned and walked away, retreating into the shadows of his office, leaving Sade to comfort the boy he had almost destroyed.
The basement levels of the penthouse were a world away from the nursery's soft pastels. Here, the air smelled of gun oil and cold concrete. Sade found Kenji in the private range, dismantling a semi-automatic pistol with the rhythmic click-clack of a man who found peace in mechanics. He didn't look up when she entered. "The boss doesn't like you down here, Mrs. Kang." "The boss is losing his mind," Sade said, her voice echoing in the soundproofed room. She walked up to the bench, placing her hands flat on the cold metal surface. "And if he cracks, who protects Hana?" Kenji paused, the slide of the gun hovering in his hand. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "That is my job." "You are one man," Sade countered, her gaze unflinching, "and Jae-Hwan is one man, a man who is currently seeing ghosts in the shadows and attacking delivery boys. He is trying to hold up the sky by himself, Kenji, and he is going to be crushed. I won't let my daughter be crushed with him." She reached out and picked up a loaded magazine. It was heavier than she expected, dense with the promise of violence. "Teach me." Kenji stood up slowly, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "If I put a gun in your hand, I am disobeying a direct order. He wants you innocent. He wants you clean." "Innocence is a luxury I can no longer afford," Sade snapped. "The Viper was in my daughter's room. Innocence didn't stop him. I don't want to be clean, Kenji. I want to be ready." For a long moment, the second-in-command studied her. He looked for the trembling maid who had arrived a year ago, terrified of her own shadow. He didn't find her. Instead, he saw the steel spine of a woman who had tamed a monster and now was preparing to fight one. Without a word, Kenji picked up a Glock 19 from the rack. He checked the chamber and held it out, handle first. "Stance wide, knees bent. Lean into it. If you lean back, the recoil will knock you off balance." Sade took the weapon. The cold polymer bit into her palm. It felt alien, an object of death in hands that had spent a lifetime nurturing and cleaning. But as she wrapped her fingers around the grip, mirroring Kenji's stance, a strange calm settled over her. "Two hands," Kenji corrected, adjusting her grip with rough efficiency. "Focus on the front sight. Don't anticipate the bang. Let it surprise you." Sade took a breath, holding it in her lungs. She pictured the black orchid on the white sheet. She pictured the Viper's shadow over Hana's crib. She squeezed the trigger. The crack was deafening, the recoil jolting through her shoulders. On the paper target downrange, a hole appeared in the outer ring. It wasn't perfect, but it was a hit. "Again," Kenji ordered. Sade squared her shoulders. "Again." The armored convoy cut through the midnight rain like a funeral procession, silent, dark, and heavy with dread. 3 black SUVs moved in tight formation, heading for the outskirts of the city where a bunker awaited. Inside the center vehicle, the air was pressurized. Jae-Hwan sat with his hand resting on the car seat between them, his fingers white-knuckled as he scanned the passing shadows. He hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. He was vibrating with a lethal tension, a wire pulled so tight it was humming. "We're 5 minutes out," Kenji's voice crackled over the radio from the driver's seat. "Perimeter of the safe house is clear." "Keep moving," Jae-Hwan ordered, his eyes never leaving the side mirror. "Don't slow down for lights. Don't stop for anything." Sade watched him, her heart aching. He was trying to be the shield, absorbing the terror so she wouldn't have to feel it. But she wasn't looking at the window. She was looking at his hands, ready to reach for the weapon concealed in her ankle holster. Then the world ended. A garbage truck, idling innocuously at a cross street, surged forward with impossible speed. It slammed into the lead SUV with the force of a wrecking ball.
The sound was a physical blow, a sickening crunch of metal that sent the lead vehicle spinning across the wet asphalt in a shower of sparks. "Ambush!" Kenji roared, wrenching the wheel hard to the left. But it was a kill box. Before the tires could find traction, blinding high beams flooded the cabin from the right. A heavy transport truck barreled out of the darkness, aiming directly for their flank. Jae-Hwan didn't scream. He didn't waste breath on warnings. In a split second of pure instinct, he unbuckled and threw his body over Sade and the baby, acting as a human roll cage. "Hold on!" The impact was seismic. The truck T-boned them, lifting the 3-ton armored SUV off the ground as if it were a toy. Gravity inverted. Sade's stomach dropped into her throat as the world spun in a terrifying slow-motion pirouette. Glass spiderwebbed but held, reinforced to withstand bullets, but groaning under the physics of the crash. The vehicle finally ground to a halt, roof first, then rolled, once, twice. The screech of steel against concrete tore through the night. Sade was pinned beneath Jae-Hwan's weight, protected from the crushing debris, listening to the terrifying symphony of destruction. When the SUV finally ground to a halt, they were upside down. Smoke filled the cabin, acrid and choking. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the hissing of a ruptured radiator and the terrifying high-pitched wail of Hana. "Jae-Hwan!" Sade gasped, coughing. He groaned, a wet, heavy sound. Warm liquid dripped from his forehead onto her cheek. Blood. He was conscious, but he wasn't moving. He was pinned. Outside, heavy boots hit the pavement. Car doors slammed. The Viper had come to collect. Sade didn't freeze. She reached down, her fingers brushing the cold steel of the gun in her boot. The fortress had fallen. It was time for the Queen to rise. Gravity was a cruel joke. Suspended upside down in the crushed cabin, Sade fought the wave of nausea as blood rushed to her head. Beside her, Jae-Hwan was a wall of silence, his legs trapped beneath the crumpled dashboard, his face a mask of agony. "Sade," he rasped, the sound wet and jagged. "The back. Get Hana. Run." "I'm not leaving you," she choked out, her fingers fumbling with the release of her seatbelt. "They are coming," he snarled, a flash of the old monster surfacing through the pain. "Do not argue with me. Run." Outside, the rain hissed against the hot metal. Through the shattered windshield, a pair of polished alligator skin shoes stepped into the light of the burning lead vehicle. A man stood there, silhouetted by the flames, holding a silencer-equipped pistol with casual indifference. "Come out, little king," a voice called out, smooth, cultured, and terrifying. It was the voice of a ghost. Park-do-hyun, the Viper. "I brought flowers." Jae-Hwan struggled, thrashing against the metal that pinned him, roaring in frustration as he tried to shield Sade with his immobilized body. He was helpless. The most dangerous man in Seoul was a sitting duck. Sade hit the buckle release. She dropped to the roof of the car, glass slicing into her palms. She didn't look at Hana, who was wailing in the back. She looked at her husband's terrified eyes. "Close your eyes," she whispered. She kicked the passenger door open, the metal groaning, and crawled out into the rain. The Viper was walking toward the driver's side, intent on putting a bullet in Jae-Hwan's head. He heard the scrape of her movement and turned, a lazy smirk playing on his lips. He saw a woman in muddy clothes, shivering in the downpour, looking small and insignificant. "The help," Do-hyun chuckled, raising his gun toward her almost as an afterthought. "I'll make it quick, darling. Then I'll take care of the baby." Sade didn't tremble. She didn't plead. She remembered the cold weight of the gun in the basement. Stance wide, knees bent. 2 hands. She reached into her boot. The motion was fluid, practiced. Do-hyun's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, just enough time for him to realize his mistake. He had looked for a victim, but the woman standing before him was a predator. "Don't touch my family." Sade squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked in her hands, the muzzle flash blinding in the dark. Once, twice. The Viper jerked violently, 2 blooms of red appearing on his chest. The look of shock on his face was frozen there as he crumpled backward, splashing into a puddle. Sade stood over him, the rain plastering her hair to her face, the smoking gun held steady. Inside the wreckage, Jae-Hwan stared out at his wife. No longer the invisible girl, no longer the maid. She stood amidst the fire and the blood, a queen who had slain the dragon to save her king.
The gun slipped from Sade's numb fingers, clattering against the wet asphalt. The sound was small, insignificant compared to the thunder rolling overhead, yet it signaled the end of the world she used to know. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling so violently they blurred in the darkness. Rainwater mixed with the mud on her skin, but it couldn't wash away the invisible stain of what she had just done. She had taken a life. The man who had terrorized her husband for a decade, the phantom who had haunted their daughter's crib, was now just a heap of wet clothes and cooling flesh at her feet. "Sade?" The voice came from the wreckage, strained and rough with pain. It wasn't a command this time. It was her lifeline. She turned, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, tearing her gaze away from the body. She scrambled back toward the overturned SUV, glass slicing her knees again, ignoring the sting. She crawled through the twisted metal until she found Jae-Hwan's face. He was pale, blood streaming from a gash on his temple, but his eyes, those dark, infinite voids, were locked on her with an intensity that burned. "You're shaking," he rasped, struggling to free an arm from the crushed dashboard. He managed to reach out, his blood-slicked fingers brushing her cheek. "I killed him," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I killed him, Jae-Hwan." She expected him to be horrified. She expected him to look at her the way he looked at his soldiers, as a tool of violence, or worse, to look at her with pity, seeing a broken thing that could never be put back together. Instead, Jae-Hwan looked at her with a terrifying mixture of devastation and awe. For the last week, he had treated her like a liability, a fragility to be locked behind blast shutters and shielded from the truth. He had become the monster again because he believed she was too soft for his world. He had tried to build a fortress to keep her hands clean, terrified that the slightest pressure would shatter her. He was wrong. She wasn't porcelain. She was steel, forged in the fire he had brought into her life. "You saved us," he corrected, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, smearing a streak of his own blood against her skin. It was a baptism, a claiming. "I tried to hide you in the dark, Sade. I thought I was protecting you." He coughed, wincing as the weight of the car pressed down on his ribs, but his gaze never wavered. He looked past the fear in her eyes and saw the queen rising beneath it. "I didn't know," he whispered, pulling her forehead down to rest against his. "I didn't know I was married to a warrior."
The basement air was stagnant, heavy with the scent of rust and impending violence. A single bulb swung overhead, casting long, oscillating shadows against the concrete walls. In the center of the room, bound to a metal chair, sat Commander Choi, the head of the security detail that had led the convoy into the ambush. Jae-Hwan leaned against the heavy steel door, his ribs wrapped tight beneath a fresh shirt, his face pale but composed. A day ago, he would have barred Sade from this room. He would have locked her in the tower to keep her eyes unpolluted by the ugliness of his world. Today, he held the door open for her. Sade stepped inside. She had scrubbed the mud from her skin, but she hadn't washed away the steel that had settled in her spine. She wore a simple black dress, but she moved with the predatory grace of a woman who had looked death in the face and pulled the trigger. Choi looked up, his lips split, expecting the monster. When he saw Sade, he flinched. "He sold our route," Jae-Hwan said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble from the shadows, "for 10 million won and a promise of safety that the Viper never intended to keep." Sade stopped in front of the man who had driven her family into a kill box. She didn't shout, she didn't tremble. She looked down at him with a terrifying calmness. "My daughter was in that car," she said softly. I didn't know," Choi stammered, sweating. "Mrs. Kang, please, I thought they just wanted the boss. I didn't know about the baby." "You didn't ask," corrected Sade. She turned to Jae-Hwan. He was watching her, not with the protective anxiety of a husband guarding a fragile treasure, but with the dark, smoldering pride of a king watching his equal take the throne. He pushed off the wall and limped to her side, handing her a heavy black file, the evidence, the confession, the judgment. "This is your house, Sade," Jae-Hwan said, his voice echoing in the small room. "He betrayed your family. His fate is yours to decide." It was the ultimate surrender of control. The Ice King, who micromanaged every breath of his empire, was handing the gavel to the maid. Sade looked at the traitor, then back at her husband. She saw the trust in his black eyes, a trust deeper than the contract, deeper than the skin hunger. He wasn't asking her to be cruel. He was acknowledging that she was capable. "Exile," Sade said, her voice steady. "Strip him of his rank, his money, and his name. Throw him out of the city. If he ever returns, if he ever speaks our name," she looked Choi dead in the eye, "then the Viper won't be the only ghost haunting this city." Jae-Hwan nodded, a dark smile touching his lips. He reached out, taking her hand, not to guide her, but to hold it. "As my queen commands." The cherry blossoms had returned to Seoul, painting the gray streets in drifts of soft pink, but the view from the penthouse balcony had changed. The blast shutters were gone, retracted to reveal the sprawling metropolis that glittered below like a sea of electric jewels. Yet as Sade stood at the railing, the wind whipping her silk dress around her legs, she didn't see the city as a collection of lights anymore. She saw it as a chessboard. She swirled the wine in her glass, watching the red liquid coat the crystal. A year ago, she would have felt vertigo standing this close to the edge. Today, the height didn't frighten her. She had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had blinked first. Heavy footsteps approached from behind, silent to the untrained ear, but loud to hers. She didn't turn. She knew the rhythm of his walk, the displacement of the air as he moved. Jae-Hwan stepped up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. He didn't pull her back from the ledge. He held her there, anchoring her to the precipice. His chin came to rest on her shoulder, the stubble grazing her skin, his breath hot against her ear. "You're thinking about him," Jae-Hwan murmured. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking about the quiet," Sade replied, leaning back into his solid heat. "It feels different." "It is different," he agreed, his hand moving to cover hers on the railing, his fingers interlacing with hers. Before, the silence was empty. It was the absence of life. Now, it is the silence of a predator who has just fed. Sade turned in his arms to face him. The moonlight washed over his features, highlighting the faint white scar on his temple, a souvenir from the crash, a matching mark to the invisible ones she now carried on her soul. The Ice King was gone, melted away by the fire she had brought, but the man who remained was no softer. He was harder, sharper, tempered by the knowledge that love was not a weakness, but the most dangerous weapon in his arsenal. "They fear you more now," Sade whispered, tracing the line of his jaw, "because they know you have a partner." "They fear us,"
Jae-Hwan corrected. He caught her hand, kissing the palm that had held the gun, the fingers that had pulled the trigger to save his life. He looked at her with a reverence that bordered on worship. "The invisible girl is gone, Sade. You are the queen of this city, and God help anyone who forgets it." He turned her back toward the skyline, wrapping his arms tight around her chest, pulling her flush against him so that their heartbeats thudded in a synchronized, heavy rhythm. They stood together on the edge of the world, no longer hiding in a fortress, no longer afraid of the shadows. They were the shadows now, two monsters who had found love in the dark, ruling their kingdom with blood on their hands and forever in their eyes.